Good morning, friends. This morning is the fifth Sunday of Easter. So we're steadily working through the Sundays of Easter, working towards Pentecost and the Ascension, the other major festivals of this part of the year. And every Sunday we learn a little bit more, we think a little bit more about the events of Easter: trial, crucifixion, resurrection, and then the time after that, where Jesus appeared to women in the garden, and so on and so forth. It's a time of very rich learning and lots of really, really interesting things to think about, not just to focus on the crucifixion, just the cross aspect, if you like, the crucifixion aspect of Easter, not just to focus on that, but to look much more broadly than that, about what is it all about? Why is Jesus going through this? And what do we think about that? And then how do we connect with that in our lives? How can that enrich our lives and help us? So, as we usually do, we look at the collect for clues and directions about what our founding bishops advised us would be a really useful thing to do in terms of our meditation and our growth, particularly our spiritual growth at this time. The collect reads, "O Christ, our Lord and Master, grant that, as thou hast risen from the dead, thy people may rise from ignorance to the firm ground of true knowledge." To the firm ground of true knowledge. There's the first piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And thence press onwards towards the mount of heavenly wisdom, where fair peace forever dwells. So here we've got a journey. This collect, for the first time perhaps in a collect, sets out a journey. Sometimes collects set out an experience that we're asked to go through, that we're asked to think about. Here, we've been asked to think about, we may think about a journey. Where do we start the journey? We try and find something that feels right for us, but which is firm ground. How do you know you're standing on firm ground? Well, one of the ways of knowing when you're standing on firm ground, if there's any disturbance, you're not particularly disturbed. If someone is trying to talk you into something or out of something or making you want to change your mind, depending on how strong you feel about that idea, you may or not hang on to it, or you may change your mind. But you may be standing on such firm ground from your side that nothing anyone says to you changes your mind. Now, this is a little bit tricky because people like that can be called stubborn. People like that can be called sort of hard to get along with because they don't sort of fit in. So, what's the trick? The trick is walking the tightrope as always. The tightrope of spiritual growth, where you're always aware of where you are. You're always aware of what you're doing, and you try to be aware of the influence you're having on other people. You always have influence on other people. We all do. Whatever we do, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, we are influencing all the people around us. And if we're standing on firm ground, are we generally an influence for good? Are we genuinely and generally an influence for peace and harmony? These things are the hallmarks of firm ground. Do people like to be with us, or do they like to have arguments with us? Do people start fighting when we come along? That's an extreme view of maybe things are not so good in your life. If that level of agitation accompanies you, you need to seek different ground, which is much firmer and has a maintenance of equilibrium. Your equilibrium, particularly spiritual equilibrium, is maintained. So, the opening thought and the opening exercise, our homework is to look, are we standing on firm ground? Because The next stage is we want to press onwards towards the Mount of Heavenly Wisdom. So where does the Mount of Heavenly Wisdom comes from? Well, this is an internal thing now. This spiritual journey is very personal. Everyone is slightly different. We're all going in the same direction. If we could all see one another spiritually, and those who are on the journey, you'd see that we're all pretty similarly inclined, and we're going in the general direction, which is getting closer and closer to Christ. So that is the answer to the question, what is this Mount of Heavenly Wisdom? Getting closer to the teacher within. That's our soul. That's the Christ within. The teacher within is what we're progressing towards. From firm ground to the teacher within. And this is especially thought about at Easter because Jesus is going through the same process, but at a higher level. He's going from the firm ground to a much higher level while remaining with us. And as the Gospels say, as recorded by Jesus, whatever growth I experience, I'm just paraphrasing now, this is Jesus, I'm just quoting Jesus, whatever experience, I draw you all up with me. So, when we're at the level that we're at, getting introduced to the way of spiritual growth, getting used to the idea that there is such a thing as a spiritual path, when we're getting used to that idea and putting it into effect, we're just starting to align ourselves with the will of God in our lives. But as we align ourselves, our momentum increases, especially as we keep returning to it day upon day upon day. We grow towards it. And the teacher within speaks to us more clearly, and you can hear the voice within much more distinctly under all circumstances. So then in the epistle, which might I read, the Acts of the Apostles, this is recording the apostles going around talking to people around the Mediterranean. And so they keep relating as they're going around the experiences in Jerusalem. And they keep telling everyone they're speaking to how it all came about. Jesus was taken before Pilate, then he was crucified, dead. He then rose from the dead, and it's absolutely in tune with, absolutely predicted by the books that are what we call the Old Testament, the Jewish books, and the Psalms, absolutely predicted in that. So, as the apostles go around, they remind people, particularly the Jews that they come across, this was predicted. And these events unfolded in the way that they unfolded, as predicted in the Psalms and the writings of what we call the Old Testament. So for a lot of people, that was very important. For others, it probably wasn't quite so important. They wanted to hear about the new words, the new news. What is the new news? A change of consciousness, a softening of the heart, a forgiveness of sins. These are very radical ideas at that time. And then in the Gospel from St. Mark, this is right at the end of the Gospel of St. Mark, this account of the women going into the garden. Mary Magdalene, another Mary, and Salome. They're going into the garden and they have got some spices. You recall what the three wise men brought at Christmas time: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And you recall the symbolism of this. Gold for a king, frankincense to purify the spiritual atmosphere, and myrrh to remind everybody that this cycle will come to an end, and myrrh is a spice that's put on the body after death. So, here they're going into the garden and they're talking among themselves and they're saying, I wonder who's going to roll away the stone. It was a very heavy stone to cover up the tomb. This was directed by the authorities so that no one would play tricks and remove the body, and so that these people who were talking about these wild ideas of this man rising from the dead. They were making sure that was not going to happen. So they put a very large stone in front of the tomb. So anyway, during the night or in the early morning, the angels dealt with that. And it was rolled away. And so the women came in, very, very frightened and agitated. The women came in. And there was an archangel in the tomb saying, "Who are you looking for? He told you he was going to rise from the dead, and he has." And then the archangel gives instructions. "Go into Galilee, and there he will meet you." It's a wonderful phrase, and we'll hear about this later in the year, in the Sundays coming up, what happens particularly when Peter goes there and has a little bit of an embarrassing conversation with Jesus. Embarrassing in the sense that Jesus said he would be denied 3 times. Anyway, that's for a little bit later. So just think for a moment the experience of these 3 women going and experiencing, interacting with this archangel. This is transforming. And when they come back and tell the other disciples, nobody knows whether to believe them or not. But it's a number of incidents that occur after the period of 3 days of Jesus lying in the tomb, after this period, where he appears to the disciples. He appears walking down the street, walking down the road, going on a town close to Jerusalem. He appears for the women. He keeps appearing. He keeps coming back and reassuring and showing people in a very dramatic fashion that he is still active in a spiritual body. He is still with them, communicating with them in a spiritual body. And there he is. So these are remarkable events of Easter. And if we read them year on year, maybe we get a bit sort of blasé and we think, oh yeah, we know what's coming up next. You must always refresh your imagination, if you like, and just be aware of what's being related here. What it means to be a Christian. What journey are we on as Christians? Where are we going from and going to as Christians? And what may our life be like while we're living, and what might life be like after we cease living in this life? So these are very powerful ideas, and something for you to think about during the week. In this special festival of Easter, where we've just got one thing to think about, we should take advantage of the idea of one thing to think about and really ruminate on it and really let it to expand in our imaginations and in our mind and in our actions, and just see how it can enrich our lives day on day.